Thank you. Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, The 4 Essential Roles of Leadership Successful Managers Must Play. It's presented today by Carissa McKenna and Samir Mehta of the Center for Creative Leadership. I'm Tracy Dobbins, and I'm your CCL webinar moderator today. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top-ranked provider of executive education globally. We work with 2/3 of the world's top 500 organizations, providing innovative solutions for the entire organization and programs proven to transform the individual. Our work is based on significant research, from our own elite teams to the finest global sources, and we share it readily with you today in this discussion. I'm pleased to have with us today Carissa McKenna. She's the Global Portfolio Lead at the Center for Creative Leadership, where she facilitates leadership development solutions with a special focus on leadership in high-tech, biotech, and research-oriented organizations, where collaboration and innovation across organizational boundaries and areas of expertise are critical to success. Carissa is joined by Samir, and he is the Director, Technology-Driven Learning at the Center for Creative Leadership. He works with various groups at CCL to ensure that digital learning products and blended learning solutions are designed and delivered seamlessly for CCL clients. He enjoys designing learning journeys for sophisticated, discerning professionals that are truly immersive and blended. Welcome, Carissa and Samir. I'll now turn the session over to Carissa to start us off.
Hi, folks. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit about some of the roles that we play at work. I know some of you are interested in change, interested in first-time leadership. There have been a lot of great things shared so far in chat. And what I'd like to invite you to do is share a little bit about the kinds of roles you play. What we tend to find is people play a number of roles that aren't on their job description, aren't part of their job title, and I'm curious what those might be for you. So if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and grab the chat and let us know, what kind of roles do you play at work, especially those that aren't on your job description. All right, we see some interesting things coming up. Several coaches, consultants, organizers, innovators, mentors, leads, coordinators. There's some great stuff. Troubleshooter. We see a lot of things that come up that are very different. Firefighter, absolutely, especially when we look at leaders on the front line of organizations made, usually not what we all aspire to. Peacekeeper, great. Thank you all for sharing so much. We do tend to see things like therapist and parent, all kinds of funny things that we end up doing. And so one of the things that we've done at the Center for Creative Leadership is to start to work through what are the roles that leaders really need to play, that everybody really needs to play to make work, to make leadership happen. And we find that there's a lot that goes into that. One of the things that is so important for us all to work through in order to understand what roles are required for leadership to happen is to really look at what do we mean by leadership. The Center has been around for a lot of years, and we've really taken our time to develop our theory of leadership, if you will. And we feel that leadership is not a single person's job. Leadership is actually a whole system of people working together to create shared direction, agreement on what we're trying to achieve together, to create alignment, which is the effective coordination of work so that it fits in together, and commitment, or willingness to make the success of the group a priority even above our personal success. So if we think about leadership as a system of humans that produces direction, alignment, and commitment, that really helps us begin to get a handle on what are some of the roles that are needed to make that leadership happen. And a lot of the roles that you brought up, I love comic relief. Thank you for bringing that in. A lot of the roles that you brought up, a lot of the competencies that we've studied for years and the skills can really be bundled into 4 overarching roles that make it a little bit easier to understand what it takes to make leadership happen in a human system. And those four roles are the role of player, the person actually doing the work, the role of manager, who is directing the work, the role of coach, who really inquires and helps people to grow, and then the role of leader, who's focused on inspiring and looking at that future-focused lens. And so we've really kind of spent some time over the last several years working with clients, working with leaders across the globe to dig into these things and see how they work. So what we hope to do today is share a little bit about what we've learned, what we've put together in these four roles. And one of the key things that we know is not only do you need to know what each role does, but for a leader to be effective in their system of humans, they need to be able to play each role well, and they need to be able to recognize which role they need to be in any given situation. Because these roles all contribute very differently to that human system and whether or not we have leadership together. So before we go any farther, I wanted to kind of take a temperature check again and ask you which of these statements best describes your level of responsibility at work. And we know that organization systems can be big and complex, so we've tried to bucket it down to just four general levels: individual contributor, leading people and projects, leading leaders, and leading the business. So if you want to take a look in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and select an answer, we'd love to hear and get a sense of kind of where is this group today. We'll give it just a moment for your responses to come in. I see a number of you are clicking through. And so one of the reasons that we're asking this is we find that which role you play kind of varies a little bit, that all people in an organization benefit from having a little bit of each of these four roles of leadership going on in their week. But what we find is that when you're at certain levels, you need to play those roles in different proportions. And so it's helpful to know where you all are. And what we're seeing is we have some individual contributors, some leading leaders, and just a few of you who are leading the business as a whole. But we really have a huge percentage of you, about 57%, who are leading people and projects. And that's great. That's really a sweet spot for me. That's where my passion and practice in leadership is. And so I'm excited to talk with you more about how these roles show up and how they might be impacting you or how you might be able to leverage each of these roles as you continue in your practice, in your work. So what we tend to find as we work with leaders across different levels is the division of the different roles tends to look something like this in an ideal world, right? So the individual contributor, in most cases, the high-performing individual contributor, really spends the most of their time in that player role, doing the work, getting the work done. They do tend to spend just a little bit of their time in each of the other roles as well. In that manager role, they're working towards mutual accountability and ensuring performance across the team. In the coach role, they may be encouraging a peer, even a superior, by asking them powerful questions, really listening to understand and helping that person see new perspectives. And, you know, individual contributors can have powerful new ideas that affect the direction of an organization. So the best individual contributors are able to influence up and out and really help important ideas get heard. So you see those little slivers. But what we see is when you become a leader of people or projects, those proportions change, and they change very significantly and very quickly. So to be really world-class and highly effective at leading people and projects, you're really going to spend a portion of your time in that player role, but more than half of your time will be spent in the other three roles. And this is really challenging for a lot of people. All of a sudden, in order to be successful, they have to focus on getting the work done through other people. That means managing performance, developing and growing others, leading and inspiring and influencing others to create that shared direction, alignment, and commitment. Again, as we continue to move up through the organization, you can see how it continues to shift all the way up to leading the business, where about half of the time is really spent in that leader role, setting direction, looking towards the future, looking at the whole system. But even at the very top, you'll see that sliver of the player role. There are times when that top level leader still needs to kind of dig into that Nike motto and just do it and get certain things done themselves. So as we look at those different roles, let's take a deeper dive and take a look at what each role tends to mean. So when we look at the role of the player, that's a little bit harder to identify at first when you're looking across industry, because the player role tends to be very industry specific. It really tends to be looking at what it takes to get things done in that particular industry. But when you look underneath the surface of the day-to-day work, you find that the player is driven by doing. They're really the person at the front lines of the organization, creating and delivering the product, the service, building the organization's value very directly through their work. They're focused on and motivated by achievement, by problem solving, by teamwork. They're looking for direct value as the outcomes of their work product. The skills they use, again, are very industry specific. They're often kind of what's in our job title, what are we educated for, what have we been trained to do. And so they vary widely across industries. But again, their focus is on that personal performance. How do I personally create value for my organization? And that's a great mindset. That's really where most of us start in our careers, is heavily focused on that player role and how do I personally perform and create value. But when you think about what that pie chart looked like for leading people and projects, you'll know that that mindset of personal performance can't carry you all the way through as you continue through a career and begin to manage and need to get work done through other people. And that's where these other three roles just become invaluable to being able to perform at the higher levels in the organization. So as we look at the role of manager has really shifted focus. And although they are still thinking about performance, they're now looking at the performance of a whole team. They're looking beyond just their individual performance, and they're looking at how they can get work done through others. So if we, again, look at that chart and really think about what is the manager up to, what is this all about? The manager is about directing the work. They do those classic MBA kinds of things. They're analyzing, budgeting, planning. They're really working toward efficiency, working towards controlling the system and making sure things are done right. They create predictability, stability, and they're looking at team performance in the current situation. They're really, really focused on short-term performance-based outcomes. When we move to the role of coach, we see another significant shift in focus. Whereas the manager was focused on the team and focused on performance, the coach is now focused on the individual and focused on development over just that performance. So if we begin to compare the two, we see something that looks a little bit like this. The manager focused on the short term, focused on that performance, digging into problem solving, giving advice, and providing performance feedback. But the coach is looking at that longer term development. They're not trying to solve the problem, they're trying to create better problem solvers. So the coach is using a completely different set of tools. They're providing developmental feedback. They're actively listening. They're asking powerful questions to unlock new possibilities and new capabilities in that person. And they're challenging limited thinking. So again, when we think about the majority of you who are leading people and projects, this is a really critical role, and it's one that often doesn't come in your job description and might not be the first that you think of when you think on taking on that job of a manager. And we certainly hear that from many, many of the leaders that we work with. But the coaching role is absolutely critical to being able to get work done through others. And you can understand that when you think about the fact that sometimes the people on your team aren't ready to take on new things. And the manager is typically overworked. So if you're going to be able to balance the workflow, you really need to be able to develop the people on your team, whether it's your project team or your direct reports, to become more capable and better able to solve problems themselves. So the coach's lens is one of inquiry, right? So they use inquiring, their agenda is development, and they're really using questioning, listening, challenging thinking skills to focus on the person and create new capabilities for future job success, right? Growth within the current position that person's in. Yeah, Samir.
Hey.
What's up?
Hey, just wanted to I think this is really insightful. I'm seeing a few comments that are being sent privately. That
Great.
People really, I think they really felt that the previous slide, and I think something you were saying there was like one isn't wrong and the other one isn't right. They're both right. You just have to know when to play which, right?
Super important, and thank you so much for keeping an eye on chat for me as we go through. Yes, all four of these roles are absolutely critical, and so it's really not about one being right or the other being wrong, or about there being a fixed quantity of, hey, I've ticked the number of minutes I've spent in this role, it's time to change hats. It's really about recognizing the needs of the situation. So as we think about that, and we'll continue to build on that theme as we go along, but if you think about a situation in which somebody is really capable of doing the work, but maybe not performing at their best, you probably want to put on that manager hat and give them some feedback, figure out what's happening, and how you can get the process working for them and with them. If somebody's in that not quite yet spot where you really want to help grow them into a new skill and you have time to spend on development, you have time to coach them and support them along the way with some smaller stretch assignments that can get them ready for new challenges, then you probably want to put on that coach hat. So a couple of the things to think about is, do we have space for failure on this? If so, that might be a good one for coaching and for developing somebody through a stretch assignment. Do we have enough time for them to learn and grow into the assignment? If the needs are urgent and the stakes are high, you might want to be in that manager kind of mindset and really looking for performance partners who are ready to deliver today. And in fact, there are times when that manager is going to look at it and say, nobody else on the team is actually ready to do this work. It's so critical, and I have the unique knowledge. I'm going to do it myself, and they'll even step back into that player role. And so all of these roles really work together, and what helps us at every level of leadership is recognizing the situation and matching our response to it. Thank you so much for bringing up some of those good chat questions, Samir. Does that help get at some of those issues that were raised?
I think that's perfect, yeah.
Super. So I'm just going to make a little more space on here. As we continue through, again, looking at that coach role and some of the key developmental skills, the skills that allow us to develop others, are really around listening, questioning, how can we challenge their thinking? And we do that in the context of building a really strong relationship and trust with one another, right? So those are some of the keys to coaching. And we don't want to leave out this last role because it becomes very important as we move into the role of managing people and projects, but it continues to be critical at every level of the organization. and that is the role of leader. So as we look at the role of leader, the leader is really looking at how do I inspire this whole system of humans to work together to produce that direction, alignment, and commitment? How can I influence people to get on board with change? The leader is far more big picture and future focused. So they're looking for collective results. They're looking for those direction, alignment, and commitment outcomes. And their mode of being, if you will, is to inspire, right? So they're going to set clear direction, vision, and strategy, really work with people to align the possibilities, to align the work itself so that people can really function as a system and get things done. They're working through that big picture lens. And if we think about it, a manager's job is kind of to get things done right, to create predictability and stability. But a leader's job is actually to create change, right? Helping move us toward that future. They're looking at, are we getting the right things done, not just getting it done right? So some of you expressed an interest in change, and this leader role is really where we see a critical factor in creating change throughout systems. Now, it's important, again, to remember when we looked back at that pie chart at the beginning, the role of leadership is one that we all share. And so everybody in an organization benefits when they have at least a sliver of this role of leader, looking towards the big picture, looking towards the future. And as we take bigger and bigger slices of that pie, we're helping others see that big picture and align with that and the possibilities that we're bringing to bear in our organizations. So we said that we're going to spend a little bit of time teasing apart when might you employ each role, which role might be right for a given situation. And so we're going to play with this a little bit, and I'm going to ask you to humor me in another poll. So let's say your coworker failed to deliver an important report, and you need this information to compile for your department and your boss. You're at risk of missing the deadline, and you need to find out what's going on with your coworker. I'm going to ask each of you to look at these 4 different responses and let us know which response resonates the most with you. Which one feels right, or which one do you gravitate toward? What might you do if this was you? In option A, you call the coworker and ask him about the status. And when you find out that it's not done, you just finish it yourself so that you know you have it in time. In option B, you call the coworker and share the impact of the late report, and then tell him you need it by the close of business. In option C, you're going to inquire about the report and why it's late. Share the impact on you and ask what the colleague might need to support him in the future to ensure that leadership gets the data they need. And again, in option D, I'm sorry, I have a little blip showing up on my computer screen. You invite your coworker to lunch and catch up on all that's been happening in his department. You discuss how the report fits into critical decision making and the bigger picture of the future priorities. So go ahead and fill out your poll. Hopefully most of you have already selected. And when it looks like we have a good number of folks reporting, we'll go ahead and advance, and we'll start looking at what some of these answers might reflect. I know so many of us would kind of go through a sequence of answers. Yes, I totally get that. But if you think about what your gut answer is, what that starts to tell us is a little bit about which role you gravitate towards. And of course, none of us are really constrained here. And as we go through a situation, we may go through multiple options. But if you selected A, if A really felt right to you, A was the response of the player, that just do it mentality that says, okay, if it's not happening, I'm going to get it done myself. My backup plan is always my personal performance. That's not a wrong answer, really we didn't give you enough information about the urgency of the report or how high stakes it was to know whether or not you need to be a player. But if it was truly urgent and business critical, there are times when even a top leader, if they have enough information, will step in and play that player role, and that's the best business choice. If you gravitated toward answer B, that's the manager role. That person is working to hold the colleague accountable for the assignment, which was that person's work to do. So they're saying, hey, we had an agreement. It was due by the end of the day. I'm going to kind of ping you and remind you of that, but I'm still expecting you to do the work. Now, in a lot of situations, this is appropriate. It's important that as colleagues, we hold each other accountable, and certainly as a manager of people and projects, and as a person higher up in the organization, that's absolutely important that people know they're accountable for the work that is assigned to them. So sometimes that is a very appropriate response. Now, if we continue on, answer C is the coach answer. And again, when there isn't that overwhelming urgency, when you know you have time and flexibility, sometimes it's okay to let someone experience the small failure of missing a deadline, if it's truly small. Sometimes it's better to help them understand what's going on and to get an understanding yourself. And so that's what that letter C is actually representing. The person is doing some inquiry and really listening to find out what's going on. And then finally, if we look at D, that person is responding in the leader role. Again, that's not a short-term answer. When we look at the coach and the leader role responses, those are longer-term responses. The coach is focused on developing the other person and getting them better prepared to answer things promptly. And what's really different about the leader response is they're trying to connect that person to the bigger picture. They're trying to help inspire them by helping them understand, why is this work important in the first place? What are the consequences of getting it done or not getting it done? And so all of these answers are good answers. If you need the turnaround fast, you probably want to focus on player or manager. Again, focused on short-term performance. And in fact, if it's really high stakes, there are times when you're going to be the player. If the other person has unique information and you can't do anything to really do it yourself, sometimes you've also got to be the manager and help hold that person accountable. And on the flip side, when you have enough time to spend talking with people, really understanding what's going on with them, it always helps your long-term relationship and their long-term development when you can understand what's happening in the background and what could change to make new possibilities happen for them. And again, in the leader role, we're helping others understand the big picture in the future. We're influencing their actions. So C and D are longer-term propositions, but absolutely critical for us to use as we seek to create that long-term future for ourselves and for our organizations. And Samir, I know you've been on duty scanning the chat. Are there any critical questions that we need to be able to respond to here?
No, there's been some really good conversation. I think you've kind of addressed a lot of the, everyone is kind of choosing a couple of options and saying, look, I've done all of these and at different times. So I think you've kind of gotten to the fact that, there isn't one correct answer and you pick a different one based on the scenario, but there is a leaning of sort of when you pick one, there is a preference that you're showing.
Sure. And the thing about leadership is knowing your preference is always empowering. Your personal preference isn't necessarily going to be the right, so to speak, the best response in every situation, but if you know that you lean that way, what you can do is be cautious. Right? So for many of us who have been high-performing individual contributors, we really feel comfortable in the player mode, even when we know something else might be more useful. There are so many times when we'll just say, I don't want to bother them. I don't really want to hear the excuse. I'm just going to get it done myself. And the challenge is, as a manager, you need to learn to get things done through others. And so if my preference is pulling me towards that player mode, I need to stop and say, is it really important right now for me to do this myself? Or do I need to get better at leaning into being the manager and helping hold somebody else accountable so that they can become a more effective contributor too? Or do I need to have that coaching conversation? So again, it's really about beginning to know yourself and know that context that you're trying to deliver and choosing the right role for the right context. So as you're trying to navigate some of those choices, as you're trying to make sense and understand which role is right when, there are some key questions you can ask yourself. So if you're considering responding in the player mode, ask yourself, why might it be important for me personally to do this work? If you don't have a really good answer to that, that might not be the right hat to put on at the moment. If you're leaning towards the manager role, think about how are you holding others accountable for doing the work? Are you doing a good job of that? Are people really living up to their expectations? And if not, you might need to have some really strong performance conversations with them. And that's something that you can practice and get good at. So if you're leaning towards the coach role, really ask yourself, who else might benefit from learning or growing through doing this work? You know, for me, maybe it's just the grunt work, but for someone else, it might be really new and exciting. So there are times when we can give that work away and provide some coaching and support to help grow others into becoming more capable contributors. And if you're leaning towards that leader role, you really want to be asking yourself, how does this work connect to the bigger organizational strategy, and who else needs to understand this connection, right? So these are just a few keys that you can ask yourself, because many of us, as we progress through our careers, especially if we're moving from individual contributor into that first-time manager of people and projects, and even some of us who have been a manager for a while, tend to lean towards that performance mode, because that's what our KPIs are. That's really what we feel like our performance measurements revolve around. And what we sometimes miss is the value of those longer-term relationships in the coach and the leader role. So really make sure you're checking in with yourself. And again, if you're making that switch, or you're helping others think about making the switch from individual contributor to manager, it's really about flipping your script and thinking not just in terms of me and how I can get it done, but how do we get it done through performance, through development, and through that longer term.
All right. I'll dive in now in a second and bring up. So, to that point, Batman. Batman's my favorite superhero. I'm going to talk about kind of this mindset that we have as successful individual contributors. I'm going to read this sentence out aloud. I'm going to ask you all, as I read it, to try and count the number of times the reference. So, I was an individual contributor or professional who got promoted into my first managerial role because I am highly competent. I have a track record of exceeding expectations. I am damn good at what I do. And much like a superhero in a movie, I have a very special set of skills that makes me who I am. There's 9 I's there in barely as many words. What's scary is 40% of new leaders fail in the first 18 months. 50% of new leaders are considered ineffective at work. It takes 143 days on average to conclude that a new leader has failed to make the transition. These are some sobering statistics for early stage leaders, right? For learners, it's important for them to realize that learning how to be a good leader early is critical to their long-term career success. Oftentimes, we find that people get stuck in a player role, trying to use the mindsets and skill sets of the player to manage, coach, or lead. And the trouble is that can really get in the way. The player is trying to do everything themselves, and to really succeed at manager, coach, leader roles, we need to flip that script. So we're going to dive into what we mean when we say flip that script. First-time leaders or early leaders, even early-stage leaders, people who are new to a role in an organization, have to realize that it's not about me or I anymore. We do that by making these fixed flips. I'm going to talk about each of them in a bit. So what do we mean by mindset? By Henry Ford, new leaders need to learn about the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. If you believe that you are all you can be and know all you can know, you've stopped growing. And none of us believe that intrinsically, but sort of making that movement very intentionally. The flip between fixed and growth mindset is going to help new leaders explore what mindset they need to bring into their new role and how they might explore what they need for the future. Even if you have led others before, you need to challenge yourself to explore the mental model that you currently bring to being a leader and see if there are unexplored areas in which you can improve. Remembering the idea that leadership is like when we train muscles in new ways, they get even stronger. When we talk about relationships, as a leader, developing and maintaining relationships is key to your success. A really wise statement by Theodore Roosevelt, which is, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. If you think about your relationships and how they will change with your peers and your leaders, you now have a seat at the table once you're in sort of a leadership position with people that used to be your bosses before. And you have to focus on building and sustaining a relationship foundation with people that used to be your peers, who you might now be senior to. Relationships are a key part of that leadership muscle, and good leaders continuously build and nurture their relationships. Okay, I'm sensing a little bit of audio issues here. Let me try something, okay? Is this any better? Let me just see the folks on chat that were having issues with audio. Is this any better than before? Worse?
Yeah, it's a little bit better.
Samir,
you may just want to kind of stay away from your computer a little bit, and it may get rid of some of the distortion.
Okay, perfect. So, folks, I'm seeing chat that is better. Okay, perfect. Thank you. One of the most interesting parts of the change in relationships is thinking about managing your boss. Right? Most people don't think about managing their boss. They think about managing people on their team. And you and your boss depend on each other for success. Right? Your boss expects something different from you. Some of your peers are now your direct reports. And how do you navigate all this? You really want to think about the results that matter, ensuring you get what you need to be successful, your boss gets what they need, and the organization gets what it needs to be successful. And this isn't easy, but this flip is really important to make to think about relationships. When we talk about attitude, what we mean is that do-it-all attitude, right? That Batman attitude that you bring into a role very often from being a successful individual contributor. And the reality is, you have to let go of some of the work that made you successful as an individual contributor or in your previous role. By doing so, you're not only making room to learn and develop new skills, what you're also doing is you're identifying specific development needs of your team, and you're able to provide coaching and support. Letting go opens the door for you to engage your team and maintain an ongoing dialogue with them. When you try to do it all, you're getting in other people's way. They aren't owning and solving the problems. They are not growing and developing. And ultimately, they become less committed to the overall goals, and leadership starts leaking out of the system. As a manager, a coach, or a leader, you really need to get to know your team to understand their strengths and what drives them, and then give them an opportunity to tackle new challenges. You have to remember their success is what's going to make you successful. When we think about perspective, with every step an individual takes to advance in an organization, they need to embrace the concept of thinking strategically. This will deepen the impact of bringing others together and allow the opportunity for shared perspective and points of view. Flipping your perspective enhances your ability to solve complex problems, think strategically, communicate across levels, and create a high-performing and inclusive culture. Leaders who strive to think outside the box will gain insight on how to lead a team in an environment that is volatile, complex, uncertain, and ambiguous. And we all pretty much live in that world, right? Understanding what the system needs, the leader brings all those roles together to bear at the right time to keep direction, alignment, and commitment happening. Something that Carissa talked about right at the beginning. When we think about, with perspective, with that deep level view, comes a really interesting thing that very often leaders don't think about or almost think of as a bad thing, which is networking. When you hear networking, a lot of people think, well, I'm not a networker. But I'm going to call on Carissa now for a moment to tell us a story of someone that we don't necessarily think of as a networker.
Yeah, so Samir knows that I just have a passion for history, and as we were talking about this, one of the things that just came to mind was Benjamin Franklin actually was a phenomenal networker, and maybe many of us don't think of him that way, but he kept extensive correspondence with scientists and political thinkers and philosophers throughout the Americas and Europe, and really his network was critical for helping America establish its independence, both getting support and military support and funding through France, as well as just drawing upon that broad network of people and bringing them together to accomplish great things. So never underestimate the power of a good network.
Thanks, Carissa. So, Benjamin Franklin was, in today's words, a bit of a networker. And the reality is, so was every great leader who's achieved results with others. As you grow, you don't get a network gifted to you. You build a strong network, an open, deep, and diverse network by doing good work together with other people and intentionally seeking out and building that network. Then let's talk about focus. And when we talk about flipping how you think or shifting how you think about what the focus is, it's about here, what we're talking about is integrity, ethics, character, accountability. It's also about your values. When individual contributors think about integrity and character, they typically think about that as relating to fulfilling the promises that they have made and getting the job done. As leaders, it's not just about completing a project, it's also about how it gets done. The how is directly related to who you are as a leader. More so than ever, all eyes are on you. The focus is on you. Your team and your leaders are always watching to see if you will do the right thing the right way while respecting others and setting the right tone to accomplish the work. Research reveals that executive leaders measure integrity as the most important character strength. And this is sort of a virtuous cycle, right? Trust builds integrity. Integrity and character builds trust, which it's a very virtuous cycle. The late Clayton Christensen, who's an absolute giant in his research and teaching, once said, "Decide what you stand for and then stand for it all the time." The spotlight is really on you now. Your team looks to you to set the example. Your team's psychological safety is determined by how you build trust through integrity and character. Figure out what you stand for and how you will demonstrate it. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Right. So we now have a question for you, and we'd love to hear from you on chat. The question we have for you is, and we want you all to answer this in 3 words or less. What do you think are the most important skills for a first-time or an early-stage manager of people and projects? So on chat, we'd like to hear in 3 words or less, what do you think are the most important skills for a first-time or early manager of people and projects? All right, I'm seeing some. Listening's coming through a lot. Humble-minded. Having a mentor, people management, yeah. Getting a lot of inputs. I love it. So I'll say, as you're typing, keep going. But I'm going to keep going too, because CCL did a lot of research. So our researchers asked a large group of leaders and their managers, as well as their direct reports, about what skills they felt were the most important. They also asked managers and direct reports about how effective they found those leaders who they were filling out this feedback for. CCL is a research-driven organization. We look at data like crazy. We're data junkies. And so we looked at all the data, and what we found was quite interesting. We found that there is a correlation, a very tight correlation between what leaders find important and what connects to how effective they are in their roles. And we found these are 6 key skills for frontline leaders. These are key skills across the manager, the coach, and the leader role. And a lot of the things I've seen in the chat are sort of rolled into one or the other of these skills that you see here. Communication really underpins all of the roles. Motivation is crucial, whether you're trying to hold people accountable or trying to help them grow. And you must be self-aware to notice how you are showing up and what role you need to be playing to sort of connect back to the roles bit. So this is a pretty tall ask, right? We've talked to you about 4 roles. We've talked to you about 6 flips. We've talked to you now about 6 skills. And so how can we help leaders grow into all these things at one time? And like we mentioned, CCL is a leadership development organization. We work with over 40,000 leaders a year across the globe on 6 continents now. And we know that leader development is not without constraints. You're always thinking about time, money, and space. And these drive that decision on how a leader gets developed, what kinds of investments go in time, money, and space. And if you look at the statistic I shared earlier on, where sometimes 60% of new leaders get no leadership development whatsoever, that's in many ways a function of this. So we've thought about this, right? Our mission as an organization is to advance the understanding and development of leadership for the benefit of society worldwide. So this is a really important question for us. And to that end, we've done a lot of research on how leaders develop. And I'm going to call on Carissa to kind of talk us through that research and what we know.
Sure. So what we know about how leaders develop really has come from our 50 years of practice in this area, both talking with and actually doing more formal research with the most high-functioning leaders around the globe. And we've done this over and over throughout the decades with different leadership populations. And what we consistently find is leaders learn about leadership in 3 key ways. They learn about 70% of their leadership learning comes from those challenging assignments, from work that they do on the job that helps inform their development. About 20% tends to come from developmental relationships. That's from the social connections of the people that they're working with, of other mentors and professionals in their lives. And only about 10% comes from the formal coursework and training that we do. So at CCL, when we do formal coursework and training, we're very cognizant of the fact that 90% of leadership learning takes place in other spaces. And what we try to do is design our learning to turn the light on, if you will, and really connect with and engage social elements, helping people build their networks and learn together, and also really hook into direct application in the work itself, so that we're never looking at formal coursework in isolation of that other 90% of leadership learning. We're using one part to really spark the whole system and fill it with some great leadership.
Thanks, Carissa. And, what we want to do is we like to say we're not just a research organization. And we're actually built as sort of test tanks to see if, so Stuart has a comment here, which I'm going to pull out. We assume that leaders are made and not born. So when CCL was sort of founded back in 1970, 50 years ago, this was not how people thought. The assumption was leaders are born and not made. That's a born leader. That's a natural born leader. And CCL really challenged that assumption heavily in its existence. And today we're glad to see that so many other people have moved in that direction, where there is a strong sort of belief now that leaders are made and not born. And to that end, we have developed programs that play out the beliefs and sort of research that we know here. So we present you these three sort of programs, not with the lens of, hey, you should do this, but to say, we've figured out how to deliver some of this. So Carissa, if I can kind of pass the ball back to you to talk us through maximizing your leadership potential.
Sure. Maximizing your leadership potential is just so near and dear to my heart. This is our 2.5-day leadership experience that's targeting towards those frontline leaders of people and projects. And we've really done a ton of work to redesign this and make it as cutting edge and relevant to current practice as we can. So it's based on leadership versatility and that player, manager, coach, leader set of 4 roles. But we really try to bring that to life and, again, hook that into social learning and to application through our 360 assessments, through interactive experiential learning, and really getting into that deep skill building and guided practice, as well as focused application and coaching over time. So those are some of the practices we're using to leverage it in maximizing your leadership potential, but we know there's more than one way to come and learn about leadership. And so, Samir, do you want to talk about some of our digital options, which are super exciting as well?
Yeah, thanks, Carissa. So we've got, Frontline Leader Impact, which is a 6-week virtual experience, like you see here, which really drives on those skills with guided sort of moderation by a leadership expert, with 7 different on-camera faculty who really and diversity in expertise and ethnicity, and Boost really focuses on the 6 flips. With that, there's some great questions here in the chat that I want to get to. So I'll stop. And I hear that a lot of people are having difficulty hearing me. So Carissa, I'm going to kind of put the ball on you for the questions, and I'll type my responses.
Okay. Absolutely. And Tracy, I know you're helping us grab it, but one that it really stands out to me and I want to respond to is, what do we know about what components support that 70%? So the 70% really comes from challenging work assignments, things like taking over a problem situation or cleaning up somebody else's mess are huge, taking on new challenges of scope and scale, managing a problem employee. These kinds of things really, really cause people to dig deep and have to find new ways of responding. And so those are some of the challenging situations. And new leaders certainly tell us time and time again they're faced with many of these things. And unfortunately, it can be a bit of a trial by fire when they're not supported and they're going through that learning. So one of the key factors you can look at, and this was suggested in chat, is finding a supportive manager, a mentor, a coach, somebody else who can help you make sense of your options and think about how to dig into that. But those coach and manager kind of relationships fall into the 20%. So that gives you a picture of how the 70 and 20 can work together to help develop leaders. Tracy, what other good questions have come up that you can help us surface?
Yes, thank you. CCL is presenting 4 essential roles of every career journey. How are these roles divided across the hierarchy of an organization?
Right. So that really goes back to the slide we shared early on, and I know some of you have logged in a little later and maybe didn't get a chance to see it, but they will be available in the webinar recording. And what we tend to see is all 4 roles in an ideal case, and what we see across most organizations is all 4 roles are actually present in different proportions at different levels in the organization. So on the one extreme, you have the individual player, the individual contributor that is in that player mode the majority of their time. but they're still going to perform best when they can contribute a little sliver of coach, a little bit of leader, and a little bit of the manager role. All the way at the other end of the extreme, you have the leader of the organization as a whole, the C-suite, and those folks tend to spend half or slightly more than half of their time in that leader role, but they're still spending a good amount of their time coaching and developing the people underneath them, building that future capability, and they're spending some of their time managing, holding people accountable. And even at the highest levels, there are certain times when, for a variety of reasons, stakes, urgency, or their own personal expertise, they're going to step back into that player role. Not often, but it still happens. The real big piece that differentiates is moving from that individual contributor role to managing people and projects. All of a sudden, you go from little slivers to really needing a solid grounding in each of the 4 roles, needing some strong skills in those, and being able to fine-tune and choose the right role at the right time. Really great questions. Thank you. What else, Tracy?
A question from Santiago. Is the main role of a leader to create a culture of trust and collaboration?
So that's definitely part of it, and I would actually say if we're talking about the 4 roles, I would say that the coach role is the role that is most focused on trust and collaboration, and that's one of the reasons that coaching is such a critical skill set. It's just invaluable, and the higher up you go in the organization, the more you need to rely upon that. So the coach is really tuning in to each individual as well as the team and building that trust, the strong relationships that can carry you through high performance together. Really good questions. So it's kind of one of labels, but absolutely critical skills at every level of leadership. Yeah. Great.
Laura asks, is there an ideal percentage of each role that you believe a successful manager should play?
There's no one right answer to that. The truth is today's organizations are divided up in all kinds of different ways, from very flat matrixed organizations to really strict hierarchies and everything in the world in between. And so there is no one right answer. The other thing we know about today's business environment is that it changes. It changes incredibly quickly. So the important thing is, whichever level you're in, really get good at building your skills in each of these 4 core roles and fine-tune that self-awareness that Samir was talking about to really focus in on what's needed in this context. What do the people around me need to be at their best, and what do we together need to get done for the business? And those will be your guide to what the exact percentage is.
Thank you, Carissa. Unfortunately, we've reached the end of our time here. Please feel free to continue to submit questions. We will get back with you individually with responses. But thank you for Carissa and Samir for sharing the importance of the roles you play at work and the 6 essential skill sets new leaders should master. We want to remind our audience to download the article 4 Leadership Roles a Successful Professional Must Play, which is in your course resources, along with a copy of today's slides. We look forward to your attendance at a future webinar. Tomorrow, everyone who attended will receive a follow-up email with a link to the webinar recording as well as the article we mentioned. And today we ask, as you exit the webinar, we hope you can take a moment to complete the evaluation so we can continue to make these events well worth your time. You can also request that a CCL team member follow up with you. Again, thank you, Carissa and Samir, and we look forward to having you join us again in the future.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with the link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.